Hey everybody, Mike Toy Bonsai Boise. This is my Dwarf Alberta Spruce. I've had it for about 5 years. I'm going to do some work on it today. But before I do, I figured I'd give you a little history on the last 5 years so you could see its ups and downs. It's had plenty of them. And then we'll get to trimming and do some wiring. So going back to January of 2020. Not quite 5 years, but 4 years and 9 months, something like that. I was in Fred Meyer's, I think it was, and I just saw all these Dwarf Alberta Spruces. Post-Christmas, they were all $5.99, and I couldn't resist. So I got one, brought it home, started working on it. Now in hindsight, I didn't have the experience then that I have now. I would not have done this in the middle of winter, and I don't advise that anybody does this in the middle of winter. I'm surprised this thing didn't die. But it didn't, thank goodness. But I made other missteps along the way too, which you'll see. It had a lot of roots, which is good. So naturally, I cut the root ball in half. My original plan, I just wanted to put it in some bonsai soil. That was a terrible idea. I would do that different. There's a lot I would have done differently. So don't judge too harshly, please. But at first, I put it in that training pot with some bonsai soil. Then I trimmed it up really good. Kind of speeding through it, but if you want to see the original video on this, you can. I'll paste a link here and you can go back and watch it. The other thing I would do differently in hindsight is I would have done all this trimming and this wiring first before I started working on roots, because it's a little wobbly in a new pot, but it's nice and stable in the pot that it's been in, so it's easier to work on it that way. And one other thing I did that I would do differently is I would have used thicker wire. But still, for my first Dwarf Alberta Spruce, it looked okay. Here it is the following month. At this point, I came to my senses and realized, why am I putting it in this trading pot? I just gotta do all the root work again later. That's dumb. Let's put it in a regular pot. So I picked this, which I loved. Unfortunately, that pot broke down the line later on, but at the time, I thought it was a perfect fit for that tree. I'm still surprised the tree didn't die. Middle of February, transpotting it again. Mistakes. But to my surprise, another month later in March of 2020, you can see new buds popping out everywhere, so it lived and it's growing. You never know with those big box store trees. Sometimes they can explode with growth once they're put in some good conditions. Other times they're just weak because they've been, in the back of a pallet on another pallet on another pallet in the back of a warehouse, This one must have been a good one. So I was surprised and I was happy and thought, cool, let's let it grow all summer. So I did. That following fall, or winter, I guess, beginning winter, in November of 2020, that's when I realized another mistake with the wire. The wire had really started to bite into the bark, as you can see there. So I took the wire off, decided to try some guy wires. You see a big bulge right there. It had some reverse taper in a few areas, but We'll just have to work on it. It's always a bummer when that happens because it takes so long to correct it. There's just no hack or fix for it. So added some guy wires, cleaned it up a little bit. Here it is the following year. We're about 9 or 10 months later. So it had grown back out, but it also had some dieback for whatever reason. I know that dwarf Alberta spruces are somewhat prone to spider mites, so that can cause that browning area there. So I did some minor maintenance, trimmed it up a little bit, and then I really just wanted to let it grow for a while after this. I made sure none of the branches were wired up, aside from guy wire, that is. Cleaned up some areas, and there's that bulge. There's some of those wire scars. And I did leave some guy wires on for a little while at least. Dwarf Alberta spruces are prone to bouncing back straight up, even after being wired for a long time. Which I'm going to try something new, which I'll get to here in a few minutes, to combat that a little bit. But otherwise, here it is after I worked on it. And I just let it grow for a full year. Here it is the following October, so over a year later. Didn't grow out much. That bulge is still there. Then I let it grow for another year and a half. Here it is in April of 24. You can see it was not in good shape for a long time. So there really wasn't much to report for the longest time. But as you can see now, it's got little green buds all over. So that was encouraging. I was very happy and relieved to see that. I think I was right in the middle of moving at this time too, so it's never good for trees to move them around too much. Here it is in July, so a few months ago. You can see it's grown out quite a bit, it's regained its health and bushed out quite a bit. You can especially tell on the tips, those bright green tips. So it's actively growing at this point. There's that bulge. I might have to live with that bulge forever, I don't know. It just won't go away and even out. But you can see the bark is kind of a different color. It's got some age now and some, after being exposed to the elements so much, looks a little older. That's always the goal with bonsai, is to have them look older and aged. And then here it is as of now. So it survived all those ups and downs. It is back to what I would call full health again. You can see those branches are starting to grow upwards again. And I'm trying something new this year that not a lot. I don't see a lot of people do this, but and there could be good reason that I'm going to learn the hard way. But what I'm trying is I'm wiring up some trees in the fall, and I'm going to let the wires sit on the branches all winter. My thinking or my hope is that the process that it goes through in dormancy, all the sap seeps down into the roots, and then later it comes back up in the spring. That process I'm hoping will harden off the branches to stay in their shape. And also, you don't have to worry about them biting into the bark because it's not actively growing. So who knows? This theory of mine might come back and bite me. If so, I'll share it, just like I'm sharing all these other mistakes I made, and you can hopefully learn from my mistakes if that's what it is. But it seems low risk to me to wire it up in the fall. So we're going to try it. But first I'm going to trim it up, address some of these longer branch issues. There are some branches that are just too long and too leggy, maybe growing in the wrong direction. So I just go around, kind of nip at it a little bit at first, just clean it up, get rid of some obvious branches that are not going to fit the mold. I'll give you some fun facts about these that I did a little research before this just so I could understand them better and share what I learned. But they are slow growing trees. They don't put on a ton of new growth. See, there's one area where I'm trying the clip and grow approach as well, so get rid of that. Now the branch is going sideways on its own. But anyways, they are slow growers. They are very hardy. From what I read, they're hardy between zones 2 and 8, and even the 7 and 8 were questionable. I saw some other sites that said 2 to 6. So they can withstand quite a bit, especially cold. They're not quite as tolerant with extreme heats, although we get extreme heat in Idaho and it seems to do fine, as long as you keep it watered. We had a streak in Idaho just this summer. I think we had something like 21 days in a row of being over 100 degrees. So I would counter argue that they can take extreme heat as long as they are adequately watered. Hopefully you can see the sort of the process here that I'm doing. I'm just taking the branches back a little bit. It always goes through kind of an awkward phase every time I take a tree back and whatnot, but it's okay. In the long run, it will look better because you won't have all these long leggy branches. You'll have taper where the branches are thicker at the base, at the trunk, and get thinner on the way out. It just looks more natural and interesting. It's harder to achieve, so it's not as common. These dwarf Alberta spruces love to sprout branches in all the wrong places sometimes. I looked it over for a while here too because I didn't realize how much height it had put on. It put on, I don't know, maybe 6 inches, which is a lot for a little tree. And I don't want it quite as tall. It doesn't look as striking when it's super tall. So I'm trying to figure out where to take it back. What should be the new leader? Right there. Yeah, I think they just look, I don't know, more striking, more impressive. The trunks, especially when they're a little shorter. Kind of like a person. If you see a 200-pound person that's 7 feet tall, they don't look 200 pounds. 200-pound person that's 5 feet tall looks a lot different. But I also got the branches going in every other fashion, as you see there. 1, 2, 3, 4. Because what I don't want is 2 branches on the right, then 1 on the left, and then 1 on the right, and then 2 on the left. I would prefer it to go every other if possible. It's a little harder on one like this where the Dwarf Alberta Spruce doesn't always necessarily have an obvious front. It's more of an all-around kind of tree. Some might argue with that. Maybe they do still technically or should have a front, but this one, at least my goal is to make it more appealing all around. So no matter what angle you view it from, it looks pretty good. We'll see if I can make that happen though. So I got it trimmed up pretty good. I use thicker wire this time. And I think I'm going to double it up as well. But again, my goal, or my theory that I'm testing, is to wire it up in the fall or late summer or fall, let it sit all winter, let it go through that dormancy period, and then in the spring take the wires off and see if the branches hold into place. That's my hope. I'm not just trying it on this, I'm trying it on some other trees as well. Got a whole bunch of little Siberian elms and Chinese elms that I'm trying that with. Some maples. So I'm experimenting with it on a lot of trees. Worst case scenario, it backfires and dies. That's the worst case scenario. Best case scenario is that it works. And all the scenarios in between. I used to wire up a branch and have, one end on the trunk and then wire it all down the branch, but I've started doing this double branch wiring. I saw Tony from Tony's Bonsai do that. And maybe it's common, maybe a lot of people do it, but the first time I saw it was from Tony. Tony was great. If you haven't checked him out, check out his channel. He's unfortunately no longer with us, but his channel lives on. He was a great guy, great energy. Loved his videos. And here I'm just doing a little bit of cleanup. Little nubs. There's that branch right there. It just kind of pokes out and is bothering me. It's been bothering me that whole process. Finally, I just dealt with it. Sometimes you kind of know what you're going to do. You don't want to do it. Like, maybe we can make it work, but you know deep down, this is not going to work. Also, full disclosure, I'm not the best wire-upper there is. I always sort of struggle with it a little bit. I'm okay. I wouldn't be completely surprised if in a week from now I look at this again, I go, and I just kind of like rewire it a little bit. Another great video on Dwarf Alberta Spruces is Peter Chan from Huron's Bonsai. Most people know who he is. If not, definitely Google or YouTube him. But he's got a great video on these, and he burns through them so fast. I mean, he will have 3 of these done in the time it took me to do this one, and they all look great every time. So check out his video on that if you're into these. I did not bother trying to keep any cuttings from this. I thought about it, but I see them every year for like, $5.99. Even at the peak of Christmas, they're like $10. So they're not really expensive. I would encourage anybody who's interested in bonsai or something like this, definitely get one. They're cheap. They're pretty easy to work with. They're tough. They just grow slowly is all. They've got their pros and cons. Finally remembered the right way to do it, to go over the branch instead of under. Like I said, I'm not the best at wiring. I always sort of do it once and then realize, oh wait, that's not it, and I undo it and redo it. So I sprayed it down with some neem oil off camera, just to kill off any spider mites that might be on it, but this is how it looked afterwards. I'm happy enough with it. This one grew some moss on the soil on its own. I never did that. And I don't even know how, because it's never happened for me before. Typically, we just have tap water here, and the chlorine and whatnot in tap water kills off moss. But this new house that I live at, it doesn't do that. So I'm not sure why. Maybe it doesn't have chlorine in it. I don't know. But it sure adds a cool look to it. So there it is after it's all wired up and all trimmed up. I can't guarantee I'm not going to rewire some of those. I might look at it one day and just decide to. But if so, I'm going to have to do it soon before fall really hits. But I'll keep everybody updated on how my theory works. Wiring it up in the fall, letting it sit all winter, and then taking it off in the spring. I'm gonna take some footage of that when I unwire it and then compare it with this footage and just see how much did it hold. Maybe, hopefully a lot. This, by the way, is just non-toxic clear glue. I seal up wounds with it quite often. That one was a pretty good one. I love how the bark is looking right now. It's looking nice and aged. Not like it did in the very beginning. If you look at it in the beginning, it had a much younger look to it, like it had never been exposed to the elements. It's got that crackling down there, all natural. So that's it in a nutshell. That's my Dwarf Alberta Spruce. Please leave me any comments, with any experience you've got. Please like and subscribe. And I love learning from everybody who's got experience. So add anything you've got. I'd love to hear it. And thanks for watching. Have a good rest of your day.